Welcome everybody. Tonight we are learning Leilu Nishmat Yehudis Liba Bas Michael Zalman, and we are also learning Leilu Nishmat Mordechai ben Rabbi Ephraim, as well as Leilu Nishmat Rabbi Avram ben Chaim Yehuda and Yecheskel ben Avraham. Okay, so let us get started. So tonight we're continuing Be'ezrat Hashem from last week. And that is, we left off where Herod was sort of, in charge at the time, and he wasn't the greatest of the people for the Jews. So we're gonna pick up where we left off from last week. So Herod, when he knew that the Jews weren't too happy on his, just like everything about it, that he wanted to make sure that the Jews don't celebrate when he dies. So he actually did something very, very odd, very interesting. Thank God it didn't come into fruition. But he made a command that he wanted that many Jews should be executed on the day that he dies, so it's not going to turn into a day of rejoicing. Thank God it didn't, come into that, to that state, but it was, it's not like things has gotten better. After he died, his son, Archelaus, he went and he took over. He took over as the king, as the ruler, however you want to call it this time. And he not only made it, not only did he not make it better, he made it actually worse for the Jewish people. He made it so bad. He actually ruled for 9 years, but he made it so bad that who eventually got rid of him? Rome got rid of him, because Rome again was overseeing Judea at the time, Israel at the time. So it got so bad that even Rome was like, whoa, this is too much, and they ended up getting rid of him. After Rome got rid of him, Israel was then ruled by local Roman governors. Those were called procurators. They're the ones that the Roman government sent, and they're the ones that ruled. So they weren't a king. Think of it as sort of a local governmental rule that they had still Rome as overseeing for it. And in fact, the overseeing, regional Roman official was actually in Syria at the time, and they were known as a proconsul. So you have the procurators, the rulers, or the governors of Judea, Israel at the time, and then you have the people that are overseeing them were known as a proconsul. So the Romans, when they took over having a Jewish king, and again, a Jewish king doesn't mean the king was a Jew, but there was a king that was ruling over them. For example, Herod, that whole situation we spoke about last time. So that once they removed that kingdom, the little freedom, the little independence that the Jews had was even removed even further. And these Roman governors, the procurators, their main goal, their main ambition was to just enrich themselves, try to get rich and wealthy as quickly as possible. And they did everything under the sun to be able to get to that. They robbed, they murdered, they did everything in between that. They tried to go, they confiscated. To the point is that they even went and they confiscated the Bigdei Kahuna, they confiscated the garments of the Kohen Gadol. And they only released it only on Yom Kippur. So even though the Jewish people at this point in time had a Bet Hamikdash, they had a temple, but they were ruling over a foreign government was ruling over them. And even that, it wasn't like, now we live in America and we don't rule, we don't control America, no matter what you say that the Jews control Hollywood, and no matter what you say that the blah, 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 all the nonsense. At the end of the day, even if the Jews are controlling that, it has nothing to do with the actual Jews. It's the Erev Hav or whatever it is. It's not the Torah observant, sect of the Jews. So over there, even though you had the Bet HaMikdash, you had, we had still people, we were still living in the land of Israel, but still we were overseen by Roman government, and we didn't even have the freedom to do the things that we wanted to do. Yes, to a certain extent, and certain times there was more freedom, and certain times there was less freedom, but it wasn't like, we lived during the time of the first Bet HaMikdash. So, and the procurators, one of the other things that they did would be, they would try to bring statues, like Avodah Zarah, idolatry, into the area, into Jerusalem. So, they were really pushing it to a very, very far level. The Roman governors, though, they didn't want to push it too hard because they knew that they could lose their position. So it wasn't sort of like a dictatorship. So they pushed the Jews to like a very, very far off limit, but then they were like, okay, wait a minute. But like they didn't want to lose it. And this is why we were able to have the Bet Hamikdash still. The Sanhedrin was still able to convene during that time. Now, during this time, we spoke about this a little bit last week. There was a group, a sect of Jews known as the Tzaddukim, or the Sadducees. These were the Jews that sort of, nowadays you would call them, went off the derech, or went off the path. They sort of created for himself a different sect of Judaism. They believed in the written Torah. They believed in the Torah Shebeksav. However, they didn't believe in the Torah Shebal Peh. They didn't believe in the oral law. Now, even though you don't have to, even if you know the elementary level of the Torah, you know that it's impossible to follow the written law without the oral. It's physically impossible. You don't even know what tefillin are. You don't even know where to put tefillin. You know, it says, you think people would say you would put it between your eyes. There's, to keep kosher, for example, if you don't have the oral law, the oral explanation, no one will be able to know and understand it. And how to properly absorb the written law, you need the oral law. So this new strain of Judaism, this new sect of Judaism, they deny the validity of the oral law, even though it makes no sense. And that's the point, and we'll soon see that if someone wants to believe in something, if someone wants to go and keep to a certain idea, no matter how much people go and tell them this is wrong for you. No matter how much people say this is wrong, it doesn't matter. If you believe that the world is flat, then everybody could scream at you from today until tomorrow, and that's what's going to be. The moon landing was all, I don't know why I'm getting into a wormhole that I don't need to, but let's go there. The moon landing was all just orchestrated by the government and the blah, 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 who people have no time, and they spent all their time on all these wasted time of, these blogs and Reddit and all this stuff, just like, because I'm a genius and I know what I'm talking about. And this is what they wasted time. And if you believe it from now until tomorrow, if someone goes and shows you proof, and the proof is, look, there's a picture. Photoshop. Every way that you can do it. So even though you have this Siddukim, and you have it that it's impossible to understand the written law without the oral law, they still would say that there's no such thing as the oral law. Even though, to the point is that they made their own oral law. So go figure that. Like they have their own oral law. Like it makes no sense whatsoever. But this is what they believed in. This gave them, and the reason why they wanted to believe that, this gave them freedom that they didn't have if you would have followed the Torah the proper way. So, people like this types of freedom, and that's why they were more attracted to it. This also appealed to the wealthy, the powerful, and especially people that were at odds, at fighting with the rabbis. And, I saw, I don't know how accurate this is, but I saw a percentage that they said that it was about 20% of the Jewish population were Tzaddukim. That's a huge, huge amount. That was a shocking number to me. But this, again, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but this is where the Jewish people are holding during the time of the second Bet Hamikdash. And the Tzaddukim, the Sadducees, they sort of encourage a life of hedonism, of pleasure seeking. Like, go and pursue the luxuries of life. And therefore they wanted to go and to interpret the Torah in their own desire. Now you have these people nowadays, they don't call themselves Tzaddukim, they call themselves open Orthodox, or they call themselves extra modern, or whatever it is that they go and they decide what's right and what's not. They pick and choose of what they're going to go and decide. One of the examples that they went to, that they interpreted the Torah, the written law, like just the way that it's written and not with any interpretation, is that the Kohanim, specifically the Kohen Gadol, they offered incense on Yom Kippur. So the way that it says, the way that they did it, these Tzaddukim, is that they first placed it on the coals of the pan outside the Kodesh HaKodashim and in the Holy of Holies, and then they would bring it inside. This is, the Torah law is really the reverse of it, but they were flat about it, and they would do it this way, even though that there is a certain idea or concept that if the Kohen Gadol didn't do the avodah of Yom Kippur properly, they would die. They would not live out there. So again, there's a lot to discuss in that. But assuming that, let's go according to that interpretation, you had still these Kohanim Gdolim, they would die. Meaning that Tzaddukim, they were able to push Kohanim Gdolim to be their as a Kohen Gadol. Meaning that a Kohen Gadol was a Tzaddukim. Wasn't even, you're talking about one of the highest levels, and we'll soon see why they pushed it so much, one of the highest levels of power, let's call it, or leadership in the time of the second Bet HaMikdash, or the first Bet HaMikdash, was the Kohen Gadol. And they would push them, and these are people that didn't even believe in the oral law. And they would do certain avodah, they would do certain work in the Bet HaMikdash, and they would die. And the next year, there is another Kohen Gadol that is also a Tzidduki. And they tell them, by the way, this is what you should do. And it's okay. They did it, and they died again. It's like one of those people that just keep on putting their hands in the trash disposal and be like, oh, let's see what happens now. No, okay, let's see what happens now. Let's see what happens. You're like, whoa, look at history for a second. And this is how much, and no matter how much they were proven wrong, they were so set on their decision that they persisted in their incorrect practices. The Tzaddukim were also allies of the Romans. The reason why the Tzaddukim started pushing themselves to the becoming Kohen Gadol is that they saw as the Romans sort of gave free reign to the Bet HaMikdash to a certain extent, and there was no king over Israel. So they saw, now where was the power? The power was, a big part of the power was in the Kohen Gadol, what is in the high priest. So they decided, wait a minute, if that's where the power is, let us go and let us try to get that position. Now, you imagine somebody wants to go and wants to try to get the high position of the chief rabbi of the world, the Gadol Hadol. You can't pay someone off and be like, hey, by the way, can you make me the chief rabbi? Can you make me the rabbi, the Gadol Hadol? You can't do that. But back then, the Judea, Israel, was ruled by the Roman government. And the Roman government saw that a lot of people wanted to have this position. So what did they do? They made a bidding auction. Whoever was the highest bidder won to be Kohen Gadol. The Tzaddukim, they were very wealthy, very powerful. They had a lot of money. So therefore, they outbid everybody else. They bribed themselves to putting themselves in the position of Kohen Gadol. Now the Romans, they saw that this is an easy source of money. They saw that, people really want this. So they would, I'm using air quotes, they would frequently let people go. Let the Kohen go. Be like, I'm sorry, it's not working out for us, your position. Either they would be let go because they wouldn't be alive, or they would let go because the Romans said you're no longer, you're no longer part of the, the high class citizenship of being a Kohen Gadol. You got a kish, and then they would, auction it again, and then there would be the next highest bidder. And that's why during the time of the first Bet HaMikdash, the time of the first Bet HaMikdash, which lasted 410 years, there were only roughly around 18 Kohanim Gdolim. 18. The second Bet HaMikdash, there were more than 300 Kohanim Gdolim, and that's not even the full 420 years. Just in that 280-year span, the last 280 years span of the 420 years, there were more than 300 Kohanim Gdolim, meaning that 410 years, you had 18 Kohanim Gdolim in the first Bet HaMikdash. The second one, in just 280 years, out of its 420, they had more than 300 Kohanim Gdolim. It became a point, unfortunately, where being a Kohen Gadol was like being a politician. And anybody knows anything about politics means you can trust a politician to the most extent. Everybody they say, they go completely afterward. It became was something that was so spiritual, so beautiful, such a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, became something that was so, let's just call it as a politician. There's no better word than saying than that. And even the Kohanim that they didn't die and they were just dismissed from their position, they continued to they had connections. They continued to exploit it for selfish needs. They abused the people, these tziddukim of Kohanim Gdolim, and this eventually brought upon the destruction of the Second Temple. Now there were signs. There were quite a few signs that there was an impending destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. First and foremost, we had Rav Tzadok, a leading rabbi, a leading sage at the time, he fasted for 40 years. He saw the signs were very obvious. You have Tzedukim in the Kohen, as being a Kohen Gadol. You have the level of the priesthood. You have the level of the observance was going down, and he saw that, and he said, you know what, it's not going to last. The Bet HaMikdash is not going to last. God is not going to allow to put his presence in such a place. And he started fasting for 40 years. You know what 40 years? The Muslims, L'Havdil, they would fast for 40 days. And then even that, forget about it. You know how people get hangry? You know, when you get hungry, and then you can put forget about it. 40 days, you know that's when, during Ramadan, there's a lot of problems that come up when people are doing something for God, right? This is what happens. That's 40 days. Rav Tzadok fasted for 40 years. Now, obviously, he was eating at night to, sustain himself, but 40 years straight of fasting. So that's the sign number one that should have stuck out, that Rav Tzadok is fasting that he says that the Bet HaMikdash is not going to last. Sign number two was the Sanhedrin left their location. They went to a different place. They used to convene in a certain place in the Bet HaMikdash, in the temple area, but they saw that there was a lot of, let's say, Kohanim, or like this Kohanim, they would engage in this, let's call it illegal activity, gangs of robbers and murderers to sort of try to enrich themselves. And the Jewish courts, the Sanhedrin, they were powerless to prosecute them, meaning that they could judge them and they could convict them to a certain sentence, but they wouldn't be able to carry out that sentence that they were able to come to through judgment. So because they were not able to go and prosecute them, they decided that it's better that we don't go and convene, we don't say, if they didn't sit, the rule is that in order for the Sanhedrin to go and to have the authority that they need to, they have to sit in a certain place in the Bet HaMikdash, in the temple area. If they're not there, then they can't judge the cases like they usually do. So the Sanhedrin goes and says, if we can't prosecute, if let's say we come to a certain conclusion, we can't put that into fruition, why are we even judging it? The Romans were over them, the Tzedukim were over them. There was like places from all of this. They said, what's the point? So they moved themselves from judging in the Bet HaMikdash. And it's another very, very impending sign of the destruction. There was also, of course, we can't forget to mention the Tzedukim, how they were overtaking all these high power positions, and they didn't even believe in the oral law. They were manipulating the Torah to their own uses. There was also something very interesting that happened, that for 40 years before the destructions, there was gates to the Bet HaMikdash, or gates to the sanctuary, and these were extremely, extremely heavy. You need tens and tens of people to go and push it open. When about 40 years, the gates started opening by themselves. They started just meaning that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was saying, well, look, you think you had a protection with these gates, now I'm opening up and the enemy could come in. Also, the Gemara in Yuma, page 39b, goes and says that for the last 40 years, the western candle of the menorah did not burn all day. It used to burn all day, and it stopped burning all day. There were certain families that knew how to make, there was a secret method of making the lechem apanim, and also the incense as well. So they decided that from then on they refused to reveal this secret. Why? Because they were nervous if there's going to be impending destruction, this impending doom that's happening. We don't want this to get hidden into the hands of the Gentiles. So they went and they kept all this. They started keeping this much more secretive. The Gemara in Sotah, page 47a, goes and says, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai suspended the practice of the sota water. There used to be a sota water. If a woman would be, suspected of being unfaithful, she would have a certain procedure where she would go to the Bet HaMikdash and drink a certain water. I'm not going to go through the whole story of what happens, but this was also stopped during this time. And we see there was a lot of things that were going down, spiritually speaking, in Yerushalayim and in the Bet HaMikdash. But it says Rabbi Victor Miller, during this time, says, whoa, let's take a step back over here. That we can't fall into the error that this whole last 40-year period was a time of national corruption. It was true that there was corruption. But where was the corruption? The corruption was in the Tzedukim. Because if you look at it, this is during the time where the great disciples, the great students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. You had Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenes over there that went to study Torah, went and he fasted. Whoever was with us in our stories that we spoke about him. Rabbi Akiva lived during this time. A little bit further on, but it lived during the time of the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash. He separated from his wife for 24 years, came back with 24,000 students. Not just students, these were Gedolei Ador, these were high level of people. This is the time where the Jewish, Torah learning was on a very, very high level. Don't get me wrong. It was very, very high. But for who? For the Orthodox sect, for the Perushim, for the Pharisees. But you have, unfortunately, the Tzeddukim. You have the Herodians, let's call them. Those are the people that they corrupted they twisted the Torah. So you had the nation war itself, says Rabbi Victor Miller, was a very high level. They followed Torah leaders and they practiced Torah with enthusiasm. But unfortunately, there was a large sect called the Tzeddukim, and they were going and they were pushing the Jewish nation spiritually down. Now, taking a pause over there, going a little bit back in time. The grandson of Herod, his name was Agrippa. Agrippa was orphaned when he was just 3 years old because his father, Herod, was missing some bolts. And his father, so that's his grandfather was Herod, his father was named as Aristobulus. Aristobulus went and he was killed by his own father because he had an insane suspicion. Herod had a suspicion that about his wife, so he had his wife executed. We spoke about that last week. And then he was nervous that his son was going to go and take sort of revenge on it. So he had his son killed, which was Agrippa. Which was Aristobulus. Now you have Agrippa, which is the grandson of Herod, and he was 3 years old when all this happened. By 6 years old, where was he going to go? So he was shipped off to Rome. He was shipped off to Rome, and he was educated with the Roman aristocrat, the high level of Roman society. He was put into that sort of educational system. And during this time, he went and he befriended two future emperors. Now, he didn't know that they were emperors, but he befriended two very high-level people. One of them was Caligula, and the other one was Claudius. And this, years go by, and Caligula eventually ended up becoming an emperor. And he decided that he was emperor of Rome. He decided that he wants a statue of himself in the Bet HaMikdash. So there are certain people that have a high level of arrogance. They have a high level of gava, where they need to be worshipped in their own home, in their own palace. But when they go outside, they pretend to be like normal people and be like, okay, fine, I'm a humble person. And they tell you that they're humble, because obviously they're humble. And then you have people that know, not only they want you to worship them inside the house, but also outside the house. But then you have people on another level where not only they want to be worshipped outside, but like where you're worshiping your God, no, now you worship me. Like now they go, so this emperor, he went and he wanted a statue of himself in the Bet HaMikdash. Now the Jews were going, like, what? To put a statue of an emperor, of a non-Jewish emperor, forget even a Jewish emperor, put a statue in the Bet HaMikdash? It's unheard of. Even you go to Jewish houses over here, religious, anywhere around the world, religious Jewish houses, you generally don't even see statues. Again, maybe some will have, but generally speaking, the more religious you are, you don't see statues. But to put a statue of an emperor, so at this point in time, this Agrippa, the grandson of Herod, was in Rome, and he decided he's going to do something about it. So he goes, and he was friends with the Roman emperor. And he invited him to a very, very lavish banquet, a beautiful banquet. And it was all in honor of the emperor. And the emperor was so happy and he had so much gratitude to Agrippa for what he did for him, this big party just for him, that he said, what do you want? Let me give you something. Let me return the favor. Let me reward you. So Agrippa goes and he says, listen, I don't want any reward for myself. I don't need anything for myself, but do me a favor. Cancel your order that you want to erect a statue in the temple. So the emperor said, you know what, for you, you got it. I'll cancel it. And he, the emperor was really pushing really strongly to have his statue put in there. But Agrippa was able to go and to cancel that, that order from the emperor. So, Agrippa already started doing something good for the Jewish nation. After the death of the Roman emperor, Agrippa over here had connections in Rome. He was a very well-connected guy. And he influenced the Senate to go and elect Claudius, his other friend, to go and become the Roman emperor. And because of his connections and his pull and his push, Claudius ended up becoming the next emperor. So as a reward to Agrippa for helping him become emperor, Claudius decided that at this point in time, we said that there was this procuratorship where there was a procurator, a governor, a ruling governor on the on Judea, on Israel. But now the Roman emperor decided that we're going to abolish that and we're going to put you, the grandson of Herod, to go back and to be king over Judea. So Agrippa went and he ruled. He ruled over Judea, and I don't know if I should say surprising or not, it was actually pretty good. He actually did like a good job. He followed halakha. Unfortunately, his reign only lasted for 3 years, but he followed Jewish law. He went, and anything that he questioned that he had, he would turn to Rabbi Gamliel. He would turn to the head of Sanhedrin and be like, what am I supposed to do? He would look for advice. And, when he would come to the Bet HaMikdash, he would give a Kabon Todah. He would give a thanksgiving sacrifice. On Shavuot, he gave he brought a gift of the first fruits to the temple together with all the other Jewish people that were coming up. On Sukkot, after Shemitah, the king would read from the Torah. They read the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And he gathered all the people over there. And the Torah requires that a Jewish king go and read the Sefer Devarim. And the law is, the halakha is, that a king is allowed to sit while he reads, because he's a king, and he's allowed to sit while he reads the Torah. But Agrippa put his own honor on the side, he put his own kavod on the side, and he decided that he's going to stand in the favor and the Torah's honor while he's standing. And he was reading the Sefer Devarim, until he comes to the 17th chapter of Devarim, verse 15. And on there, it said something that shook him to his core. It says, the pasuk goes and says, "Lo suchal lases alecha ish nachi asher lo achicha hu." You shall not appoint a foreigner over yourself, one who is not your brother. Meaning that you should not appoint somebody who is not Jewish, who is not your brother, as a king over Israel. And he read this and he started crying. And he started crying because he was not a brother of the Jewish people. He wasn't, he wasn't a Jew of the Jewish caliber. Again, we spoke about this last week, and the level of how he was, being Jewish, in that context. So he started crying, and the kind-hearted people that were over there, they were put in a very, very difficult test. There was so many long years of suffering under arrogant, abusive rulers, and finally they found somebody who is humble, who is kind, like Agrippa, and he was sort of like a pious ruler, a righteous ruler, and he wept because of his disqualification. So their hearts of the Jewish people, they started melting in pity, and they cried out, "Don't fear, don't worry, you are our brother." Right? It didn't say like you walk down the street, "Hey brother, what's going on? My brother." It said literally, "No, you are part of our nation, you are our brother." However, the Chachamim, they did not approve of this reaction. Why? Because his mother was from the family of Herod, and that does not qualify him to be a king of Israel. And therefore, the flattery that the Jewish nation gave to this king was not proper. And this is where the sages went as far to say in the Gemara on Sotah, page 41b. The Rabbi Nassan says that the Jewish people became liable for the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash in Jerusalem because they improperly flattered Agrippa. Now, during this time, the Jewish people, obviously, they loved him. But the Greeks, as much as the Jews loved him, that's how much the Greeks hated him. And the Greeks lived, at that point in time, in Israel. The Greeks, they came to such a point of such a hatred towards Agrippa that they decided that they're going to go and try to assassinate him. And one time he was visiting Caesarea, and they poisoned his drink. And after 5 days of him fighting for his life, he died at the age of 54. Now he died. Now the question is what Rome is going to do. Are they going to go appoint another governor? Are they going to go and appoint another, king? Or are they going to go back to where it was before, where it was these Roman governors? So the emperor's advisors, they said, let's restore the rule of the procurators, meaning the people of that ruled the government that were Roman. And the Roman emperor was convinced, and they started to put back this procuratorship back into play. And this lasted for 22 years, meaning that after the death of Agrippa until the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash was roughly about 22 years. During this time, there were 7 Romans that occupied the office. One of the Romans that were occupying it his name was Felix. And, during this time, it wasn't good for the Jewish people. It went from bad to worse. There was bloodshed, there was murder that was going on. There was daily fights that were going on between the Jewish people and the foreign rulers. And Felix, this Roman governor at that point in time, he would persecute anybody who he thought would be a member of his opposing, group. He would automatically go and kill them. And the opposing group, they called themselves the Zealots. These Zealots, they wanted to go and they wanted to rebel against Rome. They were like, enough already. Like, you put so much in the corner. They wanted to fight against Rome. So anytime that Felix thought that somebody was part of that group, he would go and he would kill them. 1 year after Felix was appointed, the emperor Claudius, he died. And a famous emperor by the name of Nero, which I'm sure you all have heard of, he was the one who succeeded him. This is the year 54 Common Era, right? You're talking about 26 years before the destruction of, about 15, 16 years before the destruction of the Beit Hamikdash. Nero, he was the 6th emperor of Rome, and he was cruel, corrupt, twisted, to the point that he killed his own family. That's the level of twisted that he was. He even burned down a certain city in Rome, and he enjoyed just watching the flickering of the flames. He was a corrupt, twisted guy, and his goal, his focus was not really the government, not really Rome and expanding the empire, but really was pursuit of his pleasures. And that's why he loved the bloody sports, the Colosseums, the fighting that he had. So he focused more on his pleasures, and he sort of all the provinces that he ruled over, he wasn't as, meticulously supervising them as the previous Roman officials, did. So because of this, Felix, the Roman governor that ruled Israel, he saw that the Roman emperor is not looking, so he decided that he has now more freedom than he had before. And this ended up, the murder went up, robbery went up, the Greeks, to a certain point, that there was Greek cities. These Greek cities where they had a lot of non-Jewish residents. One of them was called Caesarea. It's a place that still exists in Israel. It's called Caesarea. It's a beachfront, area, and it's on the coast. And the Greeks that lived there, amongst the Jews, decided that they want to strip the Jewish people of any of the city's citizenship, meaning that a Jew that goes into Caesarea, they're considered alien. They're considered a foreigner. This is an area, this is a place for the Greeks. So they brought it before the Emperor Nero. And Nero, he loved the Greeks. He loved the idea. The Greeks were very much after desire, and that's what his focus was also. So he goes and he agrees, and he issues a ruling, a decree, that anybody living in Caesarea, if you're a Greek, that's your hometown. If you're not Greek, then you are a foreigner. This was also one of the last straws that sort of pushed the Jews over. The Greeks now decided that there was synagogues in the area, there was places of worship in the area. The Greeks would go now and they would set up workshops next to the synagogues just to disturb the prayers. And they would do things just to go and harm the Jewish people, to start just for getting them under their nerves. So the Jewish people went to the government. They didn't take anything into their own hands, and they bribed the governor. They bribed the governor and say, "Listen, we're going to give you X amount of money. Please help us over there." He took the money and he did nothing. Then the Greeks would go and they would taunt the Jewish people by killing certain animals, like birds, for example, in front of the shul to sort of taunt them. And the Jews had enough of that, and they started charging these Greeks. Now the Romans came. The Jews thought, okay, finally the Romans are coming to help us. But who did the Romans come? Instead of chasing the Greeks who are harming them, they went and they chased the Jews. The Jews didn't know what to do. They started running away from the Romans, and they grabbed the Torah scrolls and they started running out. You're in a synagogue and you have to run out. What is the first thing that you grab? Grab a Sefer Torah. So they ran out, and they went in front of the Roman governor and says, look what's happening. So not only the Roman governor didn't help them, but he charged them, says, who gave you permission to take out the Torah scrolls? So not only did he go and help him, they were getting pushed on all sides. Now one thing that you never push someone into a corner. Because if you push someone too much into the corner, they're going to fight back. And this is the way that the Jewish people, when they would go and they would fight war, they would never corner somebody. They would always give them a way out. Why? Because you always have to have a way out. If you put someone in the corner, at the end of the day, they're going to fight back. And they're going to fight back strong, because if they feel this is the only thing they have, also an animal, you don't want to put an animal into the corner, they're going to fight back. So unfortunately, the Romans, the Greeks, everybody was pushing the Jews into a corner, and it got tighter and tighter and tighter, to the point that if anybody brought any claim against a foreigner, it was a Jewish person, brought a claim against a non-Jew, whether the claim was justified or not, they went with the non-Jew. And the Roman governor would go at this point and, without any embarrassment, without any bushot, go into the temple treasury, into the Bet HaMikdash, and take out money for his own personal gains. To the point that this Roman governor, he went and he encouraged the Romans to instigate riots. He says, no, instigate, push riots. One day, the year was 66 Common Era, about 4 years before the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, 3,600 Jews were killed in the city of Yerushalayim. Florius, who was the Roman governor at that time, he was hoping that the Jewish people of Yerushalayim would attempt to avenge it. He was like, okay, he pushed them to the corner, and now he's like, let them fight back. Why did he want to fight back? Because he wanted to do some sort of mass killing. He wanted to destroy a large sect of the Jewish nation. And he says, now he killed 3,600, now they're going to attack me, now I have a reason to go and attack them full force, and not only that, I could take over the temple. But instead of attacking the Jewish people, they arranged a sort of a peaceful protest, a peaceful march, let's call it. And they started marching and they wanted to make peace with the governor. The Roman soldiers, they were lusting for blood. They just killed 3,600 people. They were lusting for blood, that even though it was just a peaceful protest, a peaceful crowd of people that were just marching to make peace, they went and they chased after them, and they ended up killing many Jews. And the soldiers were bloodthirsty. They continuing the assault, and they were making their way towards Temple Mount, towards the Bet HaMikdash. When the Jews saw that they're going after the Bet HaMikdash, that's when all of a sudden they were like, no, this is where it's going to stop. The Jews gathered and they blocked the entrance of the Bet HaMikdash. They went and they physically put themselves on, they blocked the entrance. And for whatever reason, I don't know if it was in the eyes of the Jews or whatever, the Roman soldiers, they took a look at that and they're like, all right, we're not messing with that. And they turned around and they retreated. And the governor at that point in time realized that he pushed himself to a certain point. He was fearing that there was going to be some sort of retribution from the Jewish people, that he went back to his estate, which was at that time in Caesarea. Now, the way that we see over here is that the Jewish people are getting pushed into a very bad place from the outside government, from the foreign rule. Let's look at some stories that the Gemara says of what was happening to the Jewish people inside Yerushalayim, inside the Jewish nation. So there's a Gemara in Gittin, page 58a, that goes and says that there was an incident, and there was a certain man who, to say it the nice way, had his eyes on his master's wife. And his master was a carpenter, and he was the apprentice. And one day, his master, his boss, goes over to him and says, I need to borrow some money. For whatever reason, the apprentice had money and the boss didn't. He asked him, can you lend me some money? So he said, sure, not a problem. Send your wife to my house and I will give the money to her. And he sends his wife, and somehow his wife didn't come back for 3 days. And what happened was, this apprentice, he kept the wife in his home, and then he went back to his boss 3 days later. And he goes over and his boss goes over and says, where's my wife? And he says, I don't know, you don't know where she is? He says, I sent her immediately away. 3 days ago she was with you. You know what? He says, I heard that there was some youth that abused her on the way back. And they had their way with her. So the boss goes over to his apprentice and he said, he said, what am I supposed to do? He says, what am I supposed to do? So the apprentice says, if you want my advice, I say divorce her. Get rid of her. You don't want this headache. Get rid of her. So the boss goes and says, listen, I think you're right, but she has a ketubah, she has a marriage contract, and when I divorce her, I'm going to have to give her a lot of money. He says, I don't have that much money to give her. So the apprentice goes, listen, don't worry, I have money saved on the side. I'll lend you the money so that you could go and get divorced and give her the money. So that's what happened. He lent her the money. He lent his boss the money, and the boss went and he divorced his wife. After the boss went and he divorced his wife, his apprentice went and he married this woman. He went and he's married his woman. But the story goes on, says Gemara, something sick. That the time came that the debt was due. After all, the apprentice, he lent him money to the boss. And now it was time to pay back. It was time to go and pay back, but the boss didn't have the money. So he goes over to his apprentice and says, I don't have the money. What do you need to do? So the apprentice says, okay, so now you have to work for me. If you can't go and pay me back, if you can't pay me back, now you have to work for me. So what? He had no choice. He went and he was working for his previous employee. And his previous employee was sitting with his previous wife, and they were married at this point in time. They were eating, and the previous husband was going and he was serving his previous wife and his previous employee. And it came to a certain point that he broke down and he cried. And his tears fell into the cups that he was holding, the drinks that he was going to serve his ex-wife and his ex-employee. And then at that time the Gemara says, Va'al ota sha'a, on that moment, nichtam gzar din. This is where the Jewish people are sentenced for the destruction, if they were remaining silent in the face of such injustice. And the question that you could ask would be like, okay, so he did a few things wrong, but like, what was the extent of the wrong? Was he wrong for giving advice to say divorces? Why don't you give advice, whatever you want? You give it, that was my advice. You want to listen to it. You don't listen to it. So was it wrong that he married her? It was a single woman at this point in time. He wanted to marry her. Was it wrong that this boss went and worked for him? He needed, he owes me money. Why not? Now he has to work for me. So he was able to find every loophole that was possible, that he was doing nothing wrong. Sometimes people think that they could cheat the system. And they're so happy, don't worry about it. I knew how to cheat the system. Like, why are you happy with that? You should not be happy by saying that you could cheat the system. Every loop, there's a reason why there's rules, there's a reason why there's regulations. And yes, he was able to use every loophole to say, yes, it's not such a big deal. But you know what? You want to hear a lesson that you can learn from this? That if something is wrong, it's wrong. It doesn't matter how you're going to go and how you're going to give yourself excuses and why it's right. That's one story the Gemara says. The Gemara in Gittin, page 55b, goes and says another story. There's a very famous story. It's the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Now we're going to say the story, we're going to try to analyze it a little bit. So let me refresh everybody's mind and memory with this story. That there was a certain Jew who was unnamed in the Gemara, and he had a friend. His friend was Kamsa, and then he had an enemy. The enemy's name was Bar Kamsa. So he had a friend Kamsa, an enemy Bar Kamsa. He goes over to his servant and he says, go invite Kamsa, my friend. The servant made a mistake, and instead of going to Kamsa, his friend, he went over to his enemy Bar Kamsa. So the party starts. The host is, being a good host, is making his rounds, and all of a sudden he sees his enemy over there, Bar Kamsa. And he says, what are you doing over there? Get out of here. He says, I didn't invite you. And Bar Kamsa says, no, listen. He says, I understand, if there was some sort of mistake, don't worry about it. I'll pay for my meal. Whatever I eat, whatever I drink, I'll cover myself. I'll cover my expense. So the host says, I couldn't care less if you cover it. I want you out. So the Bar Kamsa goes and says, listen, don't embarrass me. Do me a favor. Let me stay. I'll pay for half of this feast. Imagine it was a wedding. You're putting $100,000 down. He says, I'll pay 50 grand. Just let me stay over here. Don't embarrass me. The host says, there is the door, get out. I don't want you and I don't want your money. At this point, Bar Kamsa goes and says, listen, do me a favor. Do not embarrass me. I will pay for the entire feast. You spend 100 grand on this, I will write you a check for $100,000. Just don't kick me out. This party is all on me if you don't kick me out. The host says, take you and your money. He got his guards, the bouncers, or whatever it was, and they threw him out of the party. Bar Kamsa gets thrown out of the party. He goes and he says, there was a big rabbi at that time over there, Rabbi Zechariah ben Afkalos. He was present during that time. He says, you did not come to my defense. I was being embarrassed publicly. I was being thrown out. You did not come to my defense. You're all going to pay. Bar Kamsa went and he traveled to Rome. And he went to the Emperor Nero. And he goes and he says, the Jewish people are planning a rebellion against you. And the emperor says, what? What are you talking about? Why are they planning a rebellion? He says, I can prove it. He says, how are you going to prove it? He says, go send an offering, send a korban, and send the sacrifice and see if they accept it. Watch, they're not going to accept it. So the emperor says, he sent sacrifice before. He says, no problem. He finds a very, very, beautiful animal, that's kosher, and he goes and he sends him to the temple to go and be sacrificed as a korban. The Bar Kamsa goes as they're traveling, and he makes a small blemish a small mum on this animal. It's either he did something on the upper lip of the animal or on the eyelids of the animal. So he made a blemish on the animal, which would be considered a blemish according to Jewish law, but for the Roman law, it was not considered a blemish. So when Bar Kamsa came and the Roman delegation came with this animal, the Kohanim inspected the animal and they saw that it's defective. They saw that there's a blemish. So they weren't sure what to do. And they were considering to go and offer this korban on the Beit HaMikdash so that they don't offend the emperor. However, Rabbi Zechariah was there and he says, wait a minute, he says there's a halacha. Is a blemished animal cannot be offered. If it's blemished, I don't care who gave it, you can't offer it. So they went and they didn't offer it. But then they said, you know what? But now they realized that Bar Kamsa made the blemish. So they wanted to go and kill Bar Kamsa. So Rabbi Zechariah goes and it says, wait a minute. It says, what do you mean? If you kill him, then anybody's going to think later on that if somebody makes a blemish on a korban, they need to be killed. That's not the halacha. It says we can't kill him. So they decided they're not going to do anything. So the delegation, Bar Kamsa, the delegation went back to Rome, and they said the offering was not accepted. At this point, Nero was furious. He says, what? I sent them a kosher and they don't want to go and accept my korban. This brought about one of the darkest chapters in our history. And Rabbi Yochanan goes and says, the Gemara goes on and says that the excessive humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkalos was what destroyed our temple. And I heard a very interesting, explanation of this, that sometimes in life, we need to stand up for something. We need to go and have a very, very firm hold of what we believe in. And because of and the Gemara says the anvisanuso, because of the humility, because of the fact that Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkalos, he did not stand up, he was not firm, we lost the Beit HaMikdash. He should have stood up. He should have went and been firm, whichever way, I don't know, whatever way you want to go, that it shouldn't have came to this conclusion. And sometimes in our lives, there are these crucial moments that they come, and that's when we need to really stand up strong. And if we miss that, we missed the boat. There was once a story a few hundred years ago, when people would make a wedding, they would invite the poor people first, and they would feed the poor people first. There was one rich man who was making a wedding, and there was a certain poor person, extremely, extremely poor person, that he came late, and he missed the part where he's able to feast for the poor people. And it was the time of the chuppah. The chuppah started. So he goes over to the Baal Simcha. He goes over to one of the father of the Chatan or the Kala, and he goes over to them and he says, "Listen, do me a favor." He says, "I missed the meal. I missed the food. Can you do me a favor? Can you give me some snuff, some shmek tabak? Snuff is like something that you snort through your nose. It's like a flavored tobacco. It sort of gives you a little bit of rejuvenation." So this poor person goes over to this. If you want to know where this makes the greatest entry into the Jewish nation is on Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, everyone has snuff tabak. Other than that, nobody has this shmek tabak. No one has the snuff. But anyways, he goes over to the father and he says, "Please, can you do me a favor? Can you give me some snuff?" He says, "I haven't eaten in so long. I thought I was going to eat over here. I came late. I'm going to pass out. Please give me some snuff so I can revive myself." So it was the chuppah. The father goes and says, "I can't give it to you right now. I wish I could have. I'm marrying off my kid." He says, "You got to come to me a little bit later." And the old poor man begs him. He says, "Please, I can't. I need something. Give me just a little bit." And the father says, "I can't. I'm walking my daughter down the chuppah. How am I going to go and I'm going to give it to you?" So the poor man goes into the corner. He sits on the floor and he looks up to heaven and he says, "Hashem, God," he says, "I'm not wealthy. I don't have much. In fact, I don't have anything. I don't even have food. I'm starving. But even the little snuff that I asked for, even that you can't give me? Even that I don't get?" And with that, he passes out. Sometimes goes by. The wedding comes and goes. Months turns into years. And this rich man who made this wedding starts losing his money. And slowly, he is losing all his... He's losing all his money to the point that he becomes a extreme pauper. Level of poverty was below the level of poverty. He was extremely, extremely poor. So he went over to his rabbi, a huge, huge rabbi. And he goes over to his rabbi and he says, I don't understand. He says, I'm religious. I do everything that I need to do. Nothing has changed. So how come I had money before and now I don't have any money more? Rabbi, please tell me. So the rabbi says, let me do hatavat chalom. Let me go and let me do a shelat chalom. Let me go and see what's going on in the upper worlds. He goes and he asks a question through a dream. And the rabbi goes and says, come to me tomorrow. The guy comes to him back tomorrow, and the rabbi goes over to him and he says, listen, it was about 2-3 years ago. You made a wedding? And the rich guy says, yeah. He says, during that wedding, was there a poor man that came to your wedding under the chuppah and asked you for snuff? And he thinks back and he's like, yeah. There was a guy. I was about to walk I couldn't give him anything, but yeah. So the rabbi goes over to him and he says, that because you caused this hardship to this poor man got extreme suffering for what you did. He said, all your money went to this poor man. Now this poor man became extremely wealthy and he has all your money because of the hardship that you gave him. So this wealthy man who's now poor goes over to the rabbi and says, Rebbe, what am I supposed to do? He says, what can I do at this point in time? So the rabbi goes over to him and says, listen, this man who was once poor and now wealthy, he's making a wedding. Go to the wedding and wait for the chuppah. When he's going under the chuppah, ask him for some snuff. If he doesn't give you snuff, you will change everything back to the way that it was before and you'll get your money back. So he says, fine. He goes and he travels to this wedding and he waits and and comes the chuppah and the father is walking down his daughter to the chuppah and he walks up over to the father and he says, do me a favor, I'm starving. I don't have anything, I couldn't eat anything. Can you please give me some snuff? Thinking that the father is going to be like, I'm walking my daughter down. You want snuff now? He's like, Kish, get out of here, come to me later. But that's not what happened. The father, this wealthy man goes and stops and he says, you need snuff? Sure. He takes his hand in his pocket and he takes out a handful of boxes of snuff. And he says, what flavor do you want? Do you like the mint? Do you like the lemon? Do you like the cinnamon? What do you want? Which flavor do you want? At this point in time, this poor man who was once wealthy was asking for snuff. He passes out. He faints. Not because he didn't get, the snuff, but because he didn't get the snuff. Because he wanted that he would say no, but now that he got the snuff, now he passed out. He realized that now he's not getting his money. He passed out. He goes back over to his rabbi. And he says, goes to the rabbi, it didn't work. I asked him during the most crucial part of the wedding, and I thought he's for sure going to say, what are you kidding? Get out of here. I'm going to give you snuff. But not only did he stop the wedding, he gave me options. He went and he gave me 5 options. So the rabbi says, he goes over to the rabbi, what should I do? So the rabbi goes over there and says, call this wealthy man in to me. So this wealthy man comes in, and the rabbi goes and tells him, the rabbi explained him the situation. Really, you are supposed to be poor. You got the money of this wealthy guy because of what he did. But I have a solution for both of you. He goes over to the wealthy man and he says, I want you to make the old wealthy man, now the pauper, I want you to make him your partner. And you make him your partner, I promise you, you're going to be blessed with extra money that you have now and you'll have a partner. And he says, really, this should be for you together. And this wealthy man, he respected the rabbi, and he says, fine. He made him a partner, and he ended up, the business boomed even more, and they were even wealthier than they were when they were just, separate. The lesson that we learn from this is that sometimes we come into our moments in our lives that are life-changing. And if we don't act correctly, we could miss the boat. Imagine if before he walked down the chuppah, the original wealthy man, the first wealthy man, and the rabbi goes over to him and he says, by the way, there's going to be a poor man who's going to come to you at the worst possible time. And he's going to ask you for snuff. If you don't give it to him, you're going to lose your fortune. But if you're going to give it to him, you're going to withhold your fortune. Do you think that this guy's he's going to be looking around for the poor man? The second that poor man comes, this guy's going to stop all the wedding, stop the orchestra. He says, forget about the snuff. Let me go and let me take out the smorgasbord. Let me go and feed you out over there. I don't want to go and I don't want to lose my wealth. Because there's so many times that in our life, there are certain moments, there are certain scenarios that if we miss capitalizing on those, they will change our lives forever. So the lesson that we can learn is that we have to utilize every single moment, every single scenario that we don't know, maybe this is the scenario that will change my life. Maybe this little mitzvah of giving some snuff to a poor person is going to change my life forever. Maybe me going and dressing this modestly, this extra one time, is what's going to bring me my Yeshua, my salvation. Maybe if I go and I learn now an extra 5 minutes, maybe this is going to give me the salvation. Maybe if I'm going to go and I'm going to be careful to guard my eyes, and next time I walk in the street, maybe that's going to give me my salvation. There are so many tests that we have in our day-to-day lives, and we don't know what is that one moment, that one situation that will change our life forever. And, the Chazal tell us we're human and we make mistakes. And in fact, David, for example, David HaMelech made 2 mistakes. Shaul HaMelech made 1 mistake. He didn't kill the king of Amalek. But David got forgiveness and Shaul didn't. The question is, why not? Says the Chai Adam. Says to make mistakes in life is okay, we're human. But there are certain moments in our life, there are certain scenarios in our life that are crucial, and that's when we need to stand up. And we don't always get a second chance. Shaul HaMelech had an opportunity to get rid of Amalek, and there was no second chance after that. David was able to make it up. We have to go and we have to rise to our occasion. And this occasion was for the rabbi over here. The rabbi that we said over here, during the story of the Bar Kamsa, Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolos, he had that moment. And that was the moment that he was supposed to stand up. And he didn't stand up for whatever reason. Again, this is a rabbi at the highest level. We're not saying that he did anything. This is what the Chachamim are telling us. He was supposed to stand up. But the lesson that we can learn is that we have to rise up to our occasions. So that we analyzed the rabbi. Now let's look at the other one. Look at the other situation in the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. What did Kamsa do? Look at this guy. This guy is in the story of the destruction of the temple. Kamsa was the guy who was supposed to get invited, and he didn't get invited. And now he's stuck in this story. He's like, what did I do? I was just like on the sidelines. They wanted to invite Bar Kamsa. You're putting me in the story of the destruction. The last place that any Jew wants to be is in the story of the destruction of the Bet Hamikdash. The story of the destruction of the temple that lasted for over 2,000 years. So what did Kamsa do? Why is he in this story? We could have said, there was a host and wanted to invite somebody, invited somebody else, Bar Kamsa. Let Bar Kamsa be named. So the answer that I saw was Kamsa. Who was Bar Kamsa? Bar is a son. Bar Kamsa was a son. Kamsa was the father, Bar Kamsa was a son. The father, if he had a friend and a son that were having a argument to the point that they were enemies, says, why didn't you do something about it? Why didn't you go and speak to them? If you didn't speak to them, yes, then you're part of this story. You're part of the fault, unfortunately. Now let's try to figure out who was Bar Kamsa. Let's take a second to analyze Bar Kamsa. Bar Kamsa gets an invitation. And by the way, the custom was in Yerushalayim that if you got an invitation, you didn't go yet, because you have to get invited twice, just in case you were by mistake invited. But Bar Kamsa went, and he came after only receiving 1 invitation. But he goes over to this party where it's his father's best friend. And his father's best friend hates him. And apparently the feelings apparently is kind of mutual, or what it appears to be. And now his enemy sends him an invitation. What do you do if you see an invitation from your enemy to come to a certain party? You think, okay, fine, now my enemy wants to make peace. So what would you do? You would go over to this party. The first stop that you make would be you go over to the host and be like, thank you for the invitation. I see you want to make peace. Let's bygones be bygones. Let's go and let's make shalom. Let's make peace. But we see that he didn't do that. How do we know that we see that he didn't do that? Because it says that he sat down and he was eating. The host was walking and he saw Bar Kamsa sitting down, meaning Bar Kamsa never even went to say thank you for inviting me. He never even went, thank you, let's go make peace. He never even went to go and to sort of solidify that peacemaking. Why didn't Bar Kamsa go over to him and say, hey, by the way, thank you. Let the past be the past. Let's move on from the future. But what happened over here? He goes in and he kicks him out of the party. So let's say you got insulted. Not you. Somebody gets insulted, like very, very bad insulted. What would be? I don't want to say the normal thing to do, but what would be the bad thing to do? Someone embarrassed you publicly. So okay, so this you would go and you would bash his business, bad mouth him, maybe speak lashon hara, chas v'shalom. You want to go to a high level, you would hire a hitman, okay? You would hire a hitman and kill that person. That would be the bad thing to do, but still in the, I can't say in the normal range, but let's just use a word, in the normal but bad range, right? Someone embarrasses you, you kill him, right? Assuming you're from the mafia, and that's whatever it is, okay? That's what bad people would do. A bad person would go, you embarrass me, okay, I'm going to hire him, man, you're going to get whacked now. And that's the end of the story, right? You made me red, I'm going to make your blood flow. And that's the end of the story and how it goes. But that's not what Bar Kamsa did. You know what Bar Kamsa did? Bar Kamsa is like, you did that to me? How his plan was, he gets on a boat and he travels for weeks to Rome. He goes to Rome and he says, I want to speak to the emperor. Be like, who are you? You're Bar Kamsa. Like, what's going on? So he had to go and he had to wait for an invitation to speak to the Roman emperor. I don't know how long it took and how much money he had to bribe, but eventually he came to speak to the Roman emperor. And he goes over to the Roman emperor and he says, hey, by the way, the Jews are rebelling against you. Yeah, I have a problem with one Jew, but now I'm going to destroy the whole Jew. What is this, Haman and Mordechai? What's going on over here? So he goes and he starts going, I want to destroy the whole Jewish nation. And he says they're going and they're making a revolt. They're going to go and make a rebellion against you. And he says, what are you talking about? He says, they're not going to make a rebellion. He says, I'll prove it. I'll send a sacrifice. He goes with the sacrifice, sneaks in a blemish onto this calf, and he brings it to the Bet HaMikdash. The carbon was not, and it didn't work out, right? They did not sacrifice that. He goes back to Rome for another few weeks and says, you see, they didn't do that. How extent of this revenge is of what this person did. Look at the extent of it. And in fact, I couldn't find the source of it, but I saw somewhere, and I was trying to find the source of it, that it appears that actually Bar Kamsa was a Sadducee. He was a Sadducee. That's because of his method of the retaliation. That was his mindset. But whatever it was, whether it was or wasn't, the Maharal of Prague goes and says that this description of the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, of what caused it, this described the social reality that was during that time. It was it was a separation. This is what that sinat chinam, the baseless hatred that was going on, the hatred, the divisiveness of Klal Yisrael. There was no achdut, there was no unity among the Jewish people. When the emperor heard that the people we're going to finish in a few minutes. When the emperor heard that the Jewish people are refusing to accept his offering, he was convinced that now they're going to rebel against him, and he has got to crush this down. So he sent a Roman authority by the name of Nero Caesar. He sent him against the Jews. Now this Nero, when he came in, he wanted to test his fate. And how did he test his fate? He went and he shot an arrow in each direction. And every direction that he shot an arrow, it went and it pointed towards Yerushalayim. It fell in Jerusalem. But he wanted another test. And he conducted another one. He goes over to a child and he says, tell me, child, what is it that you learned in yeshiva today? What is it that you learned? So the child goes and quotes a pasuk in Ezekiel, in Yechezkel, chapter 25, verse 14. It says, V'nasati es nikmasi be'edom, and I will put my revenge on Edom. And Nero goes and he says, wait a minute, God wants me to destroy his temple, and what's happened? He's going to get revenge against me? He says, no thank you, sir. He goes and he runs away. He ends up converting, and he runs away from the thing. And it says actually that, Chachamim came from him. Reb Meir, for example, came from Nero. Reb Meir from the Gemara. So the Roman government decided that now, and because the general, ran in the scene, they decided they're going to send somebody else, and this is where Vespasian came onto the scene. But before we go and we continue in that, and we'll continue that next week, there are numerous Gemarot that speak about the reasons and the causes of the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Now we know that the Gemara in Yuma, page 9b, is what says that what was the reason for the destruction? What we all know, sinat chinam, baseless hatred. The Gemara in Yerushalmi, also in Yuma, in 4b goes and says, also baseless hatred. The Tosefta in Menachos also says baseless hatred. Oh, we know baseless hatred is a reason for the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash. But then there's Gemara in Bava Metzia, page 30b. And it says that the reason for the destruction was because that they did not judge according to Lifnim Mishurat Adin. They didn't go beyond the letter of the law. Ask Tosfos over there. And it says, wait a minute. The Gemara in Yuma goes and says that it's Sinat Chinam. What are you telling me now that it's something that it's because they didn't judge the Lifnim Mishurat Adin? They didn't go beyond the letter of the law. So Tosfos goes and responds over there. It says the sources are not contradictory, they're complementary. Meaning both sins contributed to causing of the destruction. And with that in mind, if we look through the Gemarot, if we look through the sources of the Torah, the source of Torah doesn't always only say Sinat Chinam is the reason of the destruction. It does say that that is one of the main ones, but it doesn't say that that's the only one. And I'm going to list you very quickly as we finish off over here. I'm going to list you from a bunch of different sources of what was the reason and the cause for the additional reasons as a cause, according to the Tosas, additional reasons and causes of the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Now, with this being in mind, we have to remember, and this is why we sort of began the discussion, the class over here, there was a time of tzedukim over here, and they weren't following the Torah. So the Gemara in 119b goes and lists a bunch of reasons of why the cause of destruction of the Bet HaMikdash. Abaye says it was due to the desecration of Shabbat. Rabbi Avo says that it was because people omitted the Kriyat Shema. They're supposed to do twice daily, they weren't doing that. Rav Hamnuna goes and says that due to the interrupting school children from studying Torah, the children were out in the streets instead of studying Torah. Ula goes and says that there was a loss of shame in each other's presence. Rav Yitzchak goes and says that there were common people who are being treated like high-level, significant people. Rav Amram goes and says due to the lack of rebuke, the lack of musar going from one person to another. Rabbi Yehuda says due to the belittling of Torah scholars. And Rava says that people were there were no more faithful people. That was just the Gemara in Shabbat 19. Again, there's a whole class we can give just on these lessons and these reasons. But let's go through a few more sources. The Gemara in Bava Metzia, page 85b. It says, Rabbi Yehuda says that people were not reciting the blessing of the Torah before learning. The Sifri in Korach goes and says that there was a disgrace in the Kodashim sacrifice. The Medrash Tanchuma in Mishpatim goes and it says that people cheapened the words of the prophets. The Medrash Tanchuma also goes and says there was a belittling of justice, and the Tanit Ve'aliyahu goes there was also a belittling, going too fast, of Torah. There was a sort of a neglect of Torah study, says the Avad Rab Nassan. Again, some of these are also applicable to the first Bet HaMikdash, but regardless, these are the reasons I brought down also for the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash. Now, to try to understand this, and we're going to finish with this thought, is that we know that if you ask anybody what was the reason of the destruction of the first Bet HaMikdash, the Gemara in Yuma, page 9b goes and tells us that the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because of murder, idolatry, and adultery. There was three big sins. What was the reason of the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash? Sinat Chinam, baseless hatred. And the answer is the reason why this baseless hatred comes up as a forefront when we come and we say it is because this was the widespread problem. And in fact, when we speak about B'ezrat Hashem next week's class, we'll see how much Sinat Chinam really played a huge role in the destruction of the second Bet. Huge role. In fact, you could really say that this was the cause. However, there was additional issues, there was additional things that were wrong with it. And that was the things that we discussed. So really what we need to do is really focus on all the things. Sinat Chinam is the big one, the one that we need to. But we have to, increase our learning of our Torah. We have to make sure that we recite the Torah blessing. We have to make sure that we honor the Torah scholars. We have to make sure that we're faithful. We have to make sure that we honor the righteous people the way that they need to be honored. That, there's the things, the saying the Kriyat Shema, keeping Shabbat, all these things that we spoke about, these are all things that we have to fix so that we can have the second temple built B'mehera B'Ameinu. And with that, we'll open up to the questions. Okay, let's start with the questions. Okay. Okay. Here's the question: was Agrippa halachically Jewish? So no. So the answer is because he comes from Herod, and Herod came from a line of people that were forcefully converted to Judaism. So that was not considered a full-fledged Jew to a certain extent. There was a very quasi-state that they were in. Okay, next question. If Hashem knew they wouldn't change, why did he have to keep giving messages and it took time? Why didn't he just exile them right away? Also, in our lives, if Hashem knows we won't change, why does Why does he send us messages and gives us so much time to do tshuva if he will punish us at the end? So that's a good question. That's a heavy question. But let's give a simple answer for it. And the answer is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Baal HaRachamim. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows the future and knows what will happen, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is merciful. And because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is merciful, one of the lessons that we have to learn from this situation, and this is, you see this, I see this all the time, you see like people that are atheists, they go against God. And you ask, why isn't that God is not destroying them? Now, Chas v'Shalom, we don't want the destruction of people, we want them to do tshuva. But like, why is God not destroying them? And you want to know one reason why? It says, God goes, and if God has so much mercy, if just like He has rachamim, so too we need to have rachamim. We have to learn, there's a lesson that we could learn from this. That just like people are going and they are going against HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they're spitting in God's face, so to speak. And they're going against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But what happens? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving them and he's saying, let me see what's going to happen. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what's going to happen. All the more so when people are against us, when people are doing something to us, and they're going against us, be like, wait a minute, God is so merciful, and even though He knows He'll never do tshuva, He's still so merciful, so much more so that we need to be merciful. Just like, Mahu achum kafata achum, just like He is merciful, so too we need to be merciful. So that is one simple answer. Okay. Next question. Can you please clarify about what Rab Zechariah shouldn't have been humble for? Was it that he should have attempted to stick up for Bar Kamsa at the party so he wouldn't be embarrassed, or that he should have allowed the emperor's blemish offering to be allowed, or either? The answer is a difficult one. It could be either. When the Chachamim and the Gemara goes and says it, it just says that because of his humility, the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. It doesn't go in and analyze what part was that. Was it that he should have stood up? It's very possible it could have been all of them, or either of them, or any of them. But I can't answer that because the Gemara doesn't answer that. But whatever it was, there was something extra that could have been done. And again, this was meant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that this is what should have been done. And again, this is, you're talking about Zechariah ben Avkalas, you're talking about, Atana. We don't, it's a different level of what we could even think of thinking about to that. Okay, next question. We learn from the Bar Kamsa story that our action in this world have enormous effects. This applies both the good actions and the bad actions. It's sometimes crucial to ponder with every move we make, with every word we say, our thoughts, what we look at, how we spend our time. Very, very true. We have so much power that we could build worlds and we could destroy worlds. It's scary. It really is scary of what we have. And what's scarier is that sometimes you can make a mistake that is not easily reversible. And that's what you got to do. Again, this we spoke about before at different topics, but we have to really take this into consideration. And the next time that we come to some sort of test, some sort of scenario, let us think twice and be like, you know what? Maybe I won't click on that. Maybe I'll dress extra modestly. Maybe I'll pray extra slowly. Whatever it is that we have, let's take that next level that we need to. Next question is, why did the procurators allow the priestly garments to be used on Yom Kippur if they were against the Torah? So that's a good question. So why did the Roman governments, why did they even give back the priestly government, the big day kahuna, the priestly garments? And the answer is that even though they didn't care for the Torah and they didn't follow the Torah and they're partially against the Torah, their goal and focus was to gain wealth. So if the Jews worshipped or the Jews didn't worship, if it kept some sort of peace in them, they were fine with it. It wasn't like, it was very interesting because in other times in history, if a government or a empire would rule over, they would force their religion on them. The Romans, they didn't force, to a certain extent, they didn't force it on them. They figured, let's just get the money and let's get the taxes, so this way we have peace and let them do what they need to do. So at the end of the day, even though they were against it, they weren't doing it l'shem shamayim. They were like, okay, here is the big day kahuna that will go and, so that you could go and pray. It wasn't anything for God, it was just more selfish reasons. Okay. Next question. And I'm not reading, there's a lot of kind words that people are sending me in the chats privately. I appreciate that, thank you. I'm not reading that out loud because, I don't know, but I appreciate it. I have a random question. Nothing is random. That's first. Okay. Is emotional pain like sadness, worry, and nervousness decreed from Hashem and included in the total amount of pain that was decreed of Hashanah, just like physical pain? Or is it considered a lack of bitachon and is our fault? Excellent question. Amazing question. That question is a bomb. It's an amazing question. The question is like this. Let's say you have sadness, depression or anxiety that you you have. So is that sadness decreed or is it not? It's something that you brought upon yourself. So the answer is that a person there's something called wallowing in your misery. You know how you have a bad day or a bad situation and you're not, wherever it is, you're not where you want to be in life, whether it's financially, whether it's emotionally, whether it's relationship-wise, whatever it is, you're not where you need to be. So the people tend to wallow in their misery and they make themselves into a worse state than they are. So the initial state, that is min hashamayim. That is from heaven. But if you go and you bring yourself down to a lower, meaning that you don't try to get yourself out of that state, that is something that you're bringing upon yourself. You're bringing yourself. Who said that was the creed from Hamikdash Baruch Hu? Maybe you're going and you're bringing. A person has free will. You have the ability to go and harm yourself. So you don't want to go and bring yourself into that misery. Because at one point you can think about it and be like, listen, a day after Rosh Hashanah, let me put myself into a depressed state. Let me go for like a week. Like check off the depression for the entire year, and then I'll smooth sail. But no, that doesn't work like that because you could bring problems and suffering upon yourself, and you don't want to do that. So if something comes from outside, that is obviously from the creed on Rosh Hashanah. But where you bring the problem upon yourself and you wallow, and again, wallowing, that's a whole discussion itself. What does that mean? Because if you have something bad happens to you, what does that mean? In a second you have to snap out of it? No, we're human, and it takes time for us to snap out of it. But there's a certain point where you're just making it difficult for yourself. And I've spoken to people that were very depressed on depression, medication, on these antidepressants, and when I speak to them for years, on these things, and again, people have a very difficult time, and we're not judging anybody in these situations. But there was, a few people that could come to mind and be like, why are you wallowing in it? Like, you're on the medication, you could get out. Like, stop being so angry at everybody. Stop being so upset about everything. Try to look at more positive things. Now, again, it's easier said than done, but we have to do our part in it. Like, yes, we're in a certain state, whether it's depression, anxiety, or any other, emotional imbalance. We have to figure out a way to get out of it. The process is not a simple and easy process, and it takes time. But that process, we're going according to the right direction, then we know in the right place, and everything that was min hashamayim. But if we go and we prevent this process from happening, we're like, I don't want to get better, and you wallow in your own misery, and you go and you don't take your medication that you need to, and you bring yourself more, you're causing problems to yourself. So that would be a more of a our fault situation. But again, I'm not God's accountant. Got to put that out there. So everything only Hashem knows. Next question: how was Agrippa not considered a legit Jew if his mother or grandmother was a sister of the Kohen Gadol that was Herod? Okay, so no, his Agrippa's grandfather was Herod. Herod was not a full-fledged Jew. He was a forced convert, and therefore he was not considered a full-fledged Jew for that second, and hence the descendants are in the same boat. Next question: how did Rabbi Akiva's students die, and what sins did they do that caused them to die? So it's a good question. The Chazal, the Chachamim, our sages tell us that lo nahagu kavod zelazeh. They didn't treat each other with respect, which is actually very similar related to sinat chinam. So the reason they died, the Chazal, our sages tell us, is because they didn't treat each other with respect. What did they say, and to what extent? There's different interpretations. We spoke about this previously in our classes on Rabbi Akiva. But the short answer is they didn't treat each other with the rightful respect that they should have at their level. Next question: wouldn't true mercy be killing them before they make more sins? Or do they not have merit? For example, living 70 years full of sin as opposed to live 30 years full of sin. That's a good question. That's also playing a little bit God's accountant and saying, okay, listen, if this person's going to be a wicked person, we could say that about Hitler. Why did God allow Hitler? Hitler should have been a stillborn, right? Or it should have been an abortion. Why is it that Hitler got to let God go? Whatever the reason is, there is free will, and we have the ability to go and choose. If God would just, remove everybody that's evil in the world like this, there will be no free will. There will be nothing wrong. The second that you think of something bad, God will be like zap, destroyed. So you lose the free will. So in order to have free will, God allows this bad to happen, this evil to the sin, if you want to say it, to go on. Okay, next question. What are we supposed to feel in the 3 weeks, 9 days to Shabbat Av? The temple was destroyed years ago. How do we really feel? Every holiday has something that we need to spiritually get out of it. So the question is, what